Hello, writers. I'm Josiane Fortin, and today I'm interviewing Eric Jackson. So, Eric has recently self published his first book, so that's really exciting. It's called Feral Christian. And so, Eric, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. This is exciting. I'm really excited to be on. I mean, a little bit about me is I'm a pastor. I live in the North Woods of Wisconsin. So I live pretty much as far north as you can get in America. And so small towns. And as far as being a pastor goes, I've taken a pretty strange route to get here, and so I'm probably not going to be your normal pastor. A lot of times people, when they're younger, they feel like, okay, God told them to be a pastor, and they knew when they were like 18, and they went that route. And that was definitely not the route that I went. I went to college to become a sign language interpreter. I did that for a couple years. I really I've always loved communication. That's always been something that has been a passion of mine. Even when I was in high school, I was in a band, and it was writing songs, and then it became, sign language, and the process of interpreting was always fascinating for me. This idea that you're going to take a concept from one language and somehow make it make sense in another language, and take these things, that has always been just incredibly fascinating for me. And so I did that for a few years and really enjoyed it, but I hit this wall because as an interpreter, what happens is, like, your goal is to be invisible. Like, that's your goal, is I don't add anything to the message. I don't take anything away. It's just, and so I was in the school system, and I was interpreting in like public schools. And I just got to this point where I was like, man, I feel like I've got ideas, but there's just no way to express them, because I would be doing a bad job if I started to implement my thoughts and ideas into this. And so that's when I knew, okay, I think I want to be a teacher. So I went back to school. I got a bachelor's in like human development. It was like a lot of that stuff. And it was at that point where there was an opportunity to be a youth and children's kind of leader at the church I was going to. And I thought, hey, this is going to be a good way to kind of practice for what I'm going to do in the future. And I really thought it was a short little stint. And it just became this process where I just felt like I needed to take another step in my faith journey, of what I thought God was telling me to do. And all of a sudden, I'm here. And so it's been a very strange journey. I like it. I've never been somebody who's normal in really any kind of way. So I'm not your normal pastor. So, I mean, so that's where, so now, again, it's just, I find myself, wow, okay, so here I am. I'm the lead pastor of an amazing church way up in Wisconsin. And so, that's what I do. And that's where I'm at right now. So, I mean, that's a little bit more about me. I mean, I've got an amazing wife. I've got two bulldogs that are exactly what you would think of when you think of bulldogs. And so they keep me pretty busy. And so, that's a little bit more about me.
And like, I want to know, I always love hearing, like, why would you start to decide to write like your first book? Because we know those who've done it, like how much work it is and how much time it takes. So why did you decide to do it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. For me, this book, it had so many different, I guess, processes to it, that it was amazing, because it like started, a book always starts as an idea, just as like I've got this concept that I think is really important, that I think other people will connect with. And I think there's more people than just me that feel this, but I don't know if they can articulate it. And that was kind of what started with this whole thing. Is, as I would talk to people, how my brain works is I tend to see patterns. So I can see, like, wow, there's this pattern of, when I talk to people, everybody is feeling restless in this same kind of way. And I'm seeing this, but nobody can really put their finger on what this is. And so even as like a teenager, growing up in the church, it was like I was starting to see these patterns of just this overall frustration in a lot of people that I was feeling too. And just with my ability to communicate, it was like I was just starting to process, okay, how can I put this into words? And how can I actually put like some sort of a visual to this, so people have something to hold on to, so they can say, yes, that's it. That's what I'm feeling. And so that's been rolling around in my head for, maybe 10, 15 years. And so then I started writing it. I mean, that was like 5 years ago. I started writing it, and it was like I was writing it much more in a frustrated place, to where it was not like I had any idea that I was going to publish this. It was just like, I need to vent. I need to get this out. And so I started writing it, and then it wasn't, I put it on the shelf for like 2 years and didn't think about it. And it wasn't until like I'd matured a little bit, I'd gotten to a better place, that I went back and I didn't rewrite it, but I really sanded down the sharp edges, because I was able to take those kind of raw thoughts and emotions and make them much more constructive in a healthier place. And it was at that time that I thought, hey, this actually is ready for people to read it and hopefully give them something to connect to. And so that was kind of my process. Again, nothing I do is normal, so that's probably not the normal way that people would do it, but that was how
I
it
don't think
worked
there's
for
a
me.
normal way when you are a creative and you have something to share. I don't think there's like that's this one pattern. And I really like that you put your finger on that, because like, a lot of writers probably think they're different, or some, like most of the time we don't know other writers, and so we feel like we're weird people. But no, like we're all unique in our own ways, and we each do our own things. And I'm very curious to, like, for you to explain what the title means, because English is my second language, and feral Christian, like feral, I don't really know what you mean by that. So
Yeah,
can you explain that?
absolutely. Well, and you're not alone. I picked that title purposefully because I wanted it to be something that people kind of was like, what, when they read it. That was my goal,
That's
because
what I did. I'm like, what?
yes. So that's the whole point, is I wanted it to be something that made people go, what on earth? Because I've always loved this idea of taking a word that has had negative, like a negative connotation, and we only think of the negative parts of it, and force us to look at, in what ways is this an actual positive. And so, when you look at the word feral, all it really means, when you look up the actual definition of what a feral animal is it's an animal that acts in a way that is appropriate for its species to act in a natural environment. This is the appropriate way for that species to act. So you look at something like a feral cat, and they're acting appropriate to what a cat should act like when it is in its natural environment, when it's in the place that it was made to be in. It's just acting the way it's supposed to. It's when you move it into a domesticated state that then becomes a negative. And so for me, it was, I talked a little bit about just this frustration that I was feeling, and that was what I was trying to put some sort of visual to, is this idea that so many, Christians that I talked to felt that way, that like the more they tried to act in a way that really made sense to what the Bible said, the more they felt out of place inside of kind of the church. And so my wife and I, we got this cat when we first got married, and it was a Maine Coon mix. It was just this huge fluffy cat. And when I looked at it, it was so funny, because it was like, it still wanted to be a cat. Like when it saw a bug, like it wanted to catch it. And you could see that there was something inside of it that like remembered that like it was a cat that had like instincts and was supposed to be able to do these things,
Yeah.
but it had like all of these instincts had been bred out of it. So it seemed so confused in its own skin. Like it seemed so like, I want to be this cat. I want to be able to jump high. I want to be able to catch bugs. But every time it tried, it was just so clumsy because it's like over generations, it never needed to use these. And it was like when I saw that, and I saw that like it was like all these things that it was supposed to have, like it had this big fluffy fur that was supposed to keep it warm in the winter, but it's like now it's just a nuisance. It's getting knots and mats in it all the time. And I remember looking at it and just seeing how confused this cat looked as to like, what am I? Am I a cat or am I not? That was the moment that I finally said like, oh, like that's the visual I've been looking for, to
Yeah.
give people something to say, yes, this is my frustration. And so it was in that I was like, when I was looking at the title of this book, I was like, I'm going to just go with feral. And, I had a lot of people go like, don't go with that. That's a really bad title. But for me, it meant a lot because overall, I didn't want to write the book just because everybody would like it and I would become famous or anything. I wanted to write this book for people who desperately needed some way to connect the frustration that they were feeling.
Yeah.
And so this is who it's for. And I feel like that kind of person, even just reading the title, would go, oh, maybe that's me. Maybe this is, the visual I've been looking to connect with.
Did you decide on the title before writing the book, or is it something that came up while you were writing the book?
It was definitely way before the book was finished. But I had some of the core concepts of the book figured out, but it wasn't until I got that main visual, because I'm a very visual person. So it was like, I know I've got all these concepts. I've got all these thoughts. I have points that I want to bring forward, but I needed that all-encompassing picture. I needed that this is what wraps it all up. And once I got that, once it was the idea of a, an animal that has been pulled out of its natural habitat, put into a domesticated habitat, and then kind of shamed for acting the way it was made to act simply because it had been put in a place that it didn't really belong. Once I got that, then I knew like that's going to be the title. And so that gave me something to, as I wrote the rest of the book, that was the unifying force, is I wanted everything that I wrote to connect to that.
Okay. And then like, one day you just said, okay, my book is ready and I want to self-publish and share it with the world. And what was the hardest thing once your manuscript was finished for like becoming that self-published author?
Yeah, I mean, it was patience. I don't have a lot of patience, and it was just learning like the process. It was, I'm somebody that I go all in when I'm going to do something. This is what I'm doing. And I like things where it's like the more time and energy you put in, the more results you get. And this was a process where it was truly like it was just going to take time, no matter how much I wanted to work at it and push it forward. I was going to need to just be patient and let things happen. And I'm not the best at that. So for me, it was just that understanding that there was a while where it felt like there was always going to be one more step. Like every time I thought like, okay, it's ready to go, there's going to be one more step that you got to go, okay, let's do this before we get going. And so for me, that was the hardest part, is just trusting the process, trusting that it's going to happen, and just being patient. You have to be patient to see it through to the end.
What platform did you choose? Did you self-publish on Amazon?
Yeah. I definitely, to me, it made the most sense. It's funny because, I think what holds so many people back from self-publishing is you kind of have this fear that, you're going to become that guy that like, for me, it was like, when I went into it, I was like, I just don't want to be that person that has like 2,000 copies of my book in my basement for the rest of my life. Like that was the thing I didn't want to be. And because going into it, I was like, I don't even know, you know, I don't know how this is all going to go. I just know I need to do this. And so for me, the way that Amazon worked, where it's like, look, you know, when somebody orders it, we'll print it, we'll ship it, and you can order, you know, just small quantities of your books at a time. To me, that was just, okay, I won't be that guy that has 2,000 books just sitting in my basement when I'm, you know, 60 years old.
Yeah,
So
and then
Amazon
like when
worked
you
well.
die, your kids like just dig those up and put them in the trash.
That's exactly. I didn't want to be that, you know, for me, it was, I wanted to let this book be what it needed to be. And if there was only 20 people who needed to read this, then I wanted to be okay with the fact that only 20 people are going to read this. And so it was very important to me to do this in such a way that I did not need to make anything happen that just wasn't supposed to happen. And so for me with Amazon, it worked out well, because it was like, look, the people who really need to read this, they can get it. You know, the pricing is good and all that, but I don't have to be, you know, just trying to like, please, somebody, would you take some of these off my hands? So yeah, so that was why I went with Amazon.
Okay. And what advice would you give to someone who's looking to self-publish?
Man, I think so. When I first became a pastor and a lead pastor, and I asked just advice on that, and I was like, "Who can you guys give me some advice on being a pastor?" Because it's one of those jobs that's like, you know, it's hard to really know how to do it well. And somebody gave me a piece of advice that I've applied to everything, and I think it applies here. Is they said, run with the runners, and they basically said, find the people who actually want to like go and do something, and start to like just have those people be your tribe, and go with them, because you're always going to have the people who are pointing at the negatives and saying why this isn't going to work or whatever. And if you hang around with those people, you're going to get stuck. And so I've really tried to follow that advice in all aspects of my life, is find the people who actually want to go do something and want to be a part of it, and really surround yourself and keep pace with those people. And so for me, it was finding who in my life really believes in this. You know, when I share this idea, who is like, oh, whatever, and just kind of scoffs it off, and who's like, whoa, really? I think that's really important. And so for me, it was just making sure that those are the people that I really let in during this season. Because for me, it was like, there were times where like I wanted to just give up, where I was like, I'm
Yeah.
done. And to make sure I was surrounded with the people who believed in it, and the people who wanted to see it happen. And for me, it surprised me, because there's people who I thought for sure were going to be my biggest supporter that really just didn't seem to care that much. And you're like, oh man, that kind of hurts. But then there were other people who just kind of came out of nowhere, who were
Yeah.
just such big supporters. And so for me, it was just being like, okay, well then I'm going to pay attention to those people, because that's what really helped me to the finish line, was being surrounded with people who really believed in what I was doing.
Yeah. And do you promote your book at all?
Yeah. So I mean, I do podcasts and things like
Okay.
that, but I also do my own podcast as a way to just continue to spread the word. And it's funny because, you know, the reason I started the podcast is because I wanted the people who read the book and connected with it. I didn't want to just leave them and say, okay, figure it out. I wanted there to be another step for them to stay connected with other people. And, you know, to me, connection is so important. It's one of the most important things in this life. And so, you know, I really thought, okay, the people who read the book, I want them to have somewhere to go to continue it. But what I've actually found is it's the other way. There's a lot of people who want to hear the podcast
Yeah.
first. And it's like, as they listen and they go, okay, this guy sounds like he actually cares, and that he has something to say. Now I'll go and read the book. And so it's very different than what I expected, but that
Yeah.
has become, one of the best ways for me to promote it is just, hey, you can hear what I have to say. You can hear my heart. You can get a feel for who I am. And then, you can decide, yeah, I want to read this book. So that's become one of the other ways to just not even purposefully promote it, but it just kind of happened.
Yeah, that's what ended up happening. And make sure, like, I want to share the link to your podcast in the show notes. So we'll make sure that I get that and that I can put that in the show notes so that people, if they are interested to go check it out, they'll be able to do that.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I'd like to know, like, do you promote yourself as a writer, or it's more of an organic, hey, I'm this person and I wrote a book, or is it like
Right.
I'm a writer?
So like that's actually been one of the hardest things, is like being a pastor and then releasing a book. That's actually been challenging to make sure, like, it was really important for me to separate the two, because I didn't want to use my platform as a pastor to be like, hey, you have to buy my book. I really wanted people to be able to say, like, hey, either I am interested in this or not. And so I do promote myself as a writer, more of just a way to separate it so that I'm not doing anything that can be considered shady in any way. And so for me, that's been really important to separate. This is my time as a pastor. This is what I do. And okay, this is my time as a writer, and this is what I do. And, for me, just to have the freedom and the place to create, really organically is important, because as a pastor, I'm working with the board, and there's a lot. I can't just go and say, here's what I feel like saying today, so I'm going to say it. So I have to be much more controlled and much more conscious of everything. And so to be able to separate that and say, okay, but I've got this avenue where I can just write a song that I don't have to worry about how people are going to take it or not. I can just write it, and I can write a blog that just is just a passion project, and I don't have to worry about, okay, how is everyone, is this going to affect this or this? So that's what, for me, it helps to be able to separate it, to be like,
Yeah.
okay, here's my writer Facebook page, here's my
Mhm.
writer Instagram, and then my pastor, role can be
Yeah.
separate than that. So that's helped me out.
So your persona as a writer has more freedom because you're not attached to like external expectations of
Yes.
how you should behave and what you should say. So
Yes.
okay,
Well,
that's a good
because yeah,
way to
go
do
ahead.
it. No, no,
Yeah.
that
So as a pastor, it's what if I say something as, a pastor of this church, so that's going to represent the church. So if I say something wrong and I go back and go, that wasn't right. I said something in the moment, and now that I think about it, that was not the right thing to say. That doesn't just impact me, that impacts the church. So I got to be much more careful, where, when I go to just my, the author, the creator, whatever, if I say something and I go back and go, hey, I messed that up, that's really just on me. And so that does give me a little bit more freedom to just speak from my heart and just create from passion. And so for me, it's been very freeing just to have that separate avenue to do that.
yeah. And after writing this first book, like, do you plan to write more books?
Yeah, I did not think I would enjoy it as much as I do, but for me, it just goes back to the communication. And to me, writing is such a great way to communicate, because it gives you time to really build a, a visual and an experience of what you're trying to do. So I'm just in the beginning stages of what I want my next book to be, and I'm excited about it, because it's going to be very, very different than Feral Christian. Feral Christian is pretty straightforward as far as just chapters. It usually starts out with an example from my life, and goes into what the Bible says and then goes into the visual of the feral animal. This next one is going to be a little bit more, I'm going to challenge myself as far as it's going to take an overall story from the Bible. And then I'm going to give an overall story of my life that mirrors it. And then I'm going to really try to make it mirror the reader. So each chapter is going to be basically the Bible story written very creatively with some license taken. And then it's going to be, how an experience in my life that mirrors it. And then the last part is going to be, okay, here's how this is probably being mirrored in your life, and just go through the whole story that way. And so I'm pretty excited. I've got the overall outline done. And so now it's just really going in and actually making it into a story. So I'm excited about it though. And it's giving me a good creative outlet. So I have no idea how long it'll take me to finish it.
Yeah,
but
I was going to ask you, like, did you give yourself a deadline to make sure that you put some time in, like, working on it?
No, but maybe I should. That might be a good thing to do. But for me, it's more of I am more of a feast or famine person. I'm not great at like, hey, I'm going to put in, an hour every day for whatever. I'm like, I'm just feeling it today and I got 8 hours. So I'm putting 8 hours into it. That's the way I've got a little bit more of that personality of, I'll do it. But I'm a little different too, to where like most of my work is done just mentally. I'm constantly just in my brain working it through of like, how's this going to work and what's the overall goal? So when it's time to sit down and write, it's like I can usually just really get a ton done because my brain has just been working it through for months trying to figure it out.
I relate to that so much because like I remember in university we had to write a paper, and then like the paper would just start like being created in my mind, and so when I actually sat down to write it, it was all there. But do you stop and take notes, or you just let it like go in your brain and just have the ideas floating around? Some people say like you need to write your ideas, and others are just like, I'll remember whenever I get to it.
Yeah, I definitely write down major things just in my phone, and I've got a bunch of random notes in my phone, and none of them make any sense. It takes me a long time to usually figure out because I'm usually doing something else, and so it'll just be, this random one sentence that doesn't really make sense, and when I go back to look at it, I gotta refigure out like what was I even talking about. So I do a lot of that where it's just a quick like, hey, this is a big thing. I don't do it for everything, but if it's something where it's like, oh, that's like a major thing I want to make sure that I spend some time on, I'll write a quick note in there. I mean, the problem is I don't always go back and check it to like read it, but usually for me, if I write it down, then I remember it. So I don't even have to go back. So a lot of times it's the act of just like stopping what I'm doing and taking the time to type it into a note in my phone, that then when it comes time to write, I'm like, I'll just remember it.
Thank you. That was so awesome. Thanks for being on the podcast, Eric. And if people want to know more about your book, about your podcast, where can they connect with you?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on. This is awesome. So, I mean, my website is just theferalchristian.com. So pretty easy. And at that there, you can get to my podcast, you can get to my book, you can get to my blog. But I mean, otherwise Amazon's the way to get it, and just type in Feral Christian. It'll be the first thing that pops up. My podcast is The Feral Christian Podcast. And so you can see it's pretty easy to find what I'm about. And so the same thing, my blog's on Medium. If you just type in, Feral Christian, that's going to be me. You're going to see that. And so, but I'll send you the links as well. But yeah, that's going to be the easiest way, is to just listen to the podcast. And if you want to check out the book, Amazon's going to be the easiest place. It's got the ebook as well as the paperback. So yeah, that's the easiest way to keep in touch with me. And I'd love to hear from you. If one of your listeners like, hey, I want to find a way to identify with some of the frustrations I'm feeling, I would love to, my contacts right on my website.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric.
Yes, thank you for having me.